Thank you.
Okay, we good? I'm going to start. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our 1883 Leadership Lecture Series. My name is Christy Okerlund, and I serve as Director of the Student Involvement and Parent Programs Office, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. Each week, we invite a campus or community leader to talk about how today's student can develop their leadership skills, as well as other advice regarding personal and professional development. I am very excited to welcome and introduce you to our Superintendent of the Grand Forks Public Schools, Dr. Terry Brenner.
Everybody, thank you, and thank you for having me today. I've been looking through scrolling through the keynote speakers who have been here previously. What a slate of candidates all of you have had to listen to. I've learned a lot along the way. When I've been in my vehicle, I've been able to just listen to the conversations and listen to advice, and I've taken away so many good nuggets, and my hope for you today is that you'll take away at least two nuggets from today's conversation. So my topic is calling audibles in this ever-changing educational environment, purposeful and intentional leadership. I'm the superintendent for Grand Forks Public Schools and the Grand Forks Air Force Base School District, and I can share with you, and it wouldn't be any new news to you, that the last few years, particularly with pandemic-19, has made decision-making pretty challenging. It's one thing to, as a former basketball official, when I worked some basketball games like NDSU against UND women's basketball, you make a call, one side of the gymnasium stands up and thinks you're the best thing since sliced bread, and the other side of the gym stands up and starts calling your mother names. So that's kind of how it felt during COVID to be a leader. So I'm going to chunk it in three sections. One, I'm going to talk about my formative years and what kind of developed my leadership capacity. Not my leadership skills, but my capacity. The second chunk, I'm going to take you through a very short journey of my professional acclimation into how I got to some places. And then finally, I want to share with you who the mentors were, who are the, not the TikTok influencers, but the influencers who have helped me along the way and continue to help me in my present position. So let me just share with you that in 1918, can you see 1918 up there? Because I can't see it down here. In 1918, there was a certain young girl who was 16 years old with her parents who needed to make a macro audible decision. And that happened to be my grandmother. She was a Lithuanian Jew. It was at the time where the Russians were moving into Lithuania to occupy that land to fight the Germans. And at the same time, there was a lot of propaganda that had been going on for not tens of years, but hundreds of years about the Jewish population. So it became, while the Russians were supporting Lithuania, it became an unsafe place for Jewish people to live. So their family made this audible to leave the country and to make it to Ellis Island. So as a 16-year-old Jewish girl, my grandmother made it along with her parents. We're still not sure if the whole family made it or not, but I have enough information to know that my grandmother did, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. And so she found her love and her husband somewhere in New York. They eventually settled in Rhode Island. And born to them, their second child was my father, Henry. And at 6 months of age, he contracted spinal meningitis and lost his hearing and became profoundly deaf. And in 1929, when he was born, in 1930 and the 1940s, sign language was forbidden. Schools for the deaf went up to grade 9. So his option was a school for the deaf in Providence. So to travel from Woonsocket, Rhode Island on Route 44 down to Providence was about a 24-minute drive. And I remember asking my father, what was that like sitting in the front seat between mom and dad and talking to them on the way? And he said, that wasn't my experience at all. I said, well, where did you sit? And I'm thinking of myself as a parent of a young 13, soon-to-be 14-year-old. Well, where were you? And he said, I was sitting in the back seat. What were you doing on that 24-minute drive? Counting trees. That was his life. That was his life of silence. And the rest of his story is fascinating, but that's for another time. So fast forward to the end of his 9th grade year, he had two choices. He could go into the workforce to be a carpenter, or he could go into the workforce and reupholster furniture. He chose neither one. He stayed at the School for the Deaf for 2 more years. So as an soon-to-be 18-year-old sophomore, he walked up the front steps of a public high school in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, asked to meet with the principal, asked to meet with the football coach, and said, in a handwritten note, I want to go to school here. I want to play football here. Gee, we've never had a deaf student before. We don't know how to educate you. So it was back and forth between notes, lip reading. Fast forward to 1950, and he ends up having a 4-year football scholarship to the University of Rhode Island, where he was not only a 4-year starter both ways, offensively and defensively, but he was the co-captain for his team. In 1954, he received a letter from the Philadelphia Eagles, said, "Henry, get your stuff ready. We're really interested in drafting you." He had one more year of college. It took him 5 years to finish. Can you imagine that? It took him 5 years to finish in 1954. So he stayed in school, and at the same time, he had this girlfriend called Joanne. And after so when he finished his degree in education, one of his 3 opportunities was at the School for the Deaf in Devils Lake, North Dakota. And oh, by the way, he was deaf and Jewish, and his girlfriend was hearing and Catholic. That was a relationship that was not accepted at all. We have lots of stories about that relationship, but I can tell you almost 68 years later, they've lived happily ever after. But to get to Devils Lake, North Dakota, my father had to travel there himself. My mother was still in college at the University of Rhode Island. She was a sophomore. She was in a sorority. And somewhere over Labor Day weekend, she snuck out the window and picked up a train in Providence, went to New York, went to Philadelphia, went to Chicago, and eventually made her way to Devils Lake, North Dakota. Not sure my dad was expecting her. They had no way to communicate back then. But she arrived, and on September 22nd, just a couple of weeks later, they got married in front of 2 people. So he called his audible, my mother called her audible, and if it hadn't been for the 2 of them, I wouldn't be standing in front of you today. There's their photograph in 1956, September 22nd. In 1978, I was a junior in high school. I transferred from one school to another. I was in a public high school, and my teacher, Mrs. Bott, was the short stories ELA English teacher. She was the first teacher in my whole academic trajectory to say something positive to me about my capacity to learn. As a matter of fact, she sent to me and to my parents an efficiency in the mail, not a deficiency. I probably would have been more acclimated to get one of those, but I got an efficiency, and she has no idea the trajectory that she started me on by just that one simple thing. Mrs. Bott is in the North Dakota, or in the Devils Lake Teachers Hall of Fame as a result of how she connected to students. At the same time, about this time during my formative years, I was a 15-year-old quarterback for a pretty good football team that ended up in the state championship game. I didn't make it that far because I had an injury. But nonetheless, my Hall of Fame father was a volunteer assistant coach for our football team, and he would call the play. So he would send the play in, and we were playing one of our big rivals on the 2-yard line, on their 2-yard line, 4th down, 2 to go. I'm the quarterback. He sends the play in. This is like yesterday. This is painful. I might even start crying when I share this with you. He sends in the play, wing right, 24, counter trap on 2. So I get up to the line of scrimmage, and I'm assessing the defense, and everything is going to the right, including my left guard, who's going to pull to the right. And I'm looking at their linebacker and their cornerback, and they're hot. They're coming in. So I call an audible, not like Peyton Manning, but like Terry Brenner would call an audible. And I assess the situation. I think I can take it the other way. So I call an audible at the line of scrimmage, take the snap, turn, fake the handoff, put the ball on my hip, and now I'm going to run what's called a naked bootleg. Bubba, are you here? Do you still want me? So I start heading this way, and I learn what physical inertia is. I run right into the defensive end, lose a yard, 4th down, we don't score. My next move, I had one of 2 opportunities. I could have left the field and gone to the locker room, or I could have gone to the sideline to face the person who called the play, and that was my father. And we joke today about my career-ending neck injury wasn't from the helmet-to-helmet collision that actually happened in a game. It was when he got a hold of my face mask on the sideline. With love, let me just say with love, and then put his arm around me, and we talked about it. But that was my first real public audible as a quarterback. So here, there have been some setbacks along the way. This is me when I was younger. I'm actually young enough to have colored pictures, but I'm old enough to have some black and whites as well. So when I was a freshman in high school, I was pretty good in track. I was a pretty good half miler. As a matter of fact, I had the 2nd fastest time in the state of North Dakota. So I was thinking, I'm going to college. I'm going to run in the Olympics. That's what I'm going to do. My sophomore year, in the spring, before track starts, no, I guess track had already started, I break my leg in 4 places. 3 screws, a rod that looks like a crochet hook that hooked onto my ankle, ran up my fibula because it shattered in discs, and then another nice nail that just kind of anchored my my ankle in place. So I had to wear that for 4.5 to 5 months. So my next journey was to get ready for basketball. I was going to miss football anyway. So here you see me as a junior playing in a basketball game and could move. I was fairly mobile, but still had some restrictions because my ankle was kind of locked in place. That spring, my junior year, I'm running track and I have this chronic shoulder separation. My shoulder continued to pop out in running the 400 or the 800, and my face met the track several times. And I remember my parents asking me if it's worth it, and I just wanted to get through the season. So that middle picture is after I had shoulder reconstruction surgery. But the real story here isn't about Terry Brenner as an athlete. It's a little more about vanity. I just wanted all of you to know that I had a 29-inch waist at one time in my life. So we get into the professional part. We're in the middle chunk. Trust me, you're going to be able to leave here today. I started in special education because deaf ed was sort of my background growing up. I grew up on the campus of the School for the Deaf through my 8th grade year, so all of my friends before I went to kindergarten were deaf. Signing was my first language. The spoken language was my second. So I kind of fell into that, where I worked with deaf or hard of hearing students in public schools, where I would follow them around. I was their interpreter, I was their tutor, I was their teacher. And by doing that, I was in so many different classrooms. I learned so much about teaching and learning. So I picked up my second degree in elementary education along the way, kind of did it all concurrently. And then I knew when I landed my first classroom job as a 6th grade teacher, worked with a principal who maybe really didn't like his job. I'm not so sure he liked adults, and I know that he didn't like kids with behavioral issues. So I thought, 99% of this work is about relationships. I want to be a principal. I want to be a leader. So I started going back to school in the summers. I was commuting from Devil's Lake to UND and did that, and I became one of the youngest principals in North Dakota at the age of 29. Sure wish I would have had a lot more experience before I became a principal. So there were audibles that I made along the way, macro-level audibles that had consequences, micro-level audibles that had consequences, but always along the way, making decisions knowing that you were going to affect somebody in one way or the other. Nick Saban, retiring football coach for Alabama, said, don't be a leader if you want people to like you. If you want people to like you, sell ice cream. And that is so true. I guess you've all heard that before. That was one of my big jokes for today. Thank you. For the people at home, I know you're laughing as well. So I was a principal for about 18 years and certainly aspired to be in central office, superintendency, somewhere on my radar. I just didn't know when, because we have this thing called a family. And my wife is here. Oh, that wasn't going to happen. My wife is here today. One of the greatest supporters that I have in doing this work, because it's really complicated work, and there's a lot that she has to put up with. I call her my first lady of the school district. So I became a director, central office, and actually I left the principalship, and my wife and I left the country for a year, where we had an opportunity to go to the United Arab Emirates, and I was able to be the director of school leadership for not the country's 720 schools, but for 50 schools as a pilot program. And the whole notion was to develop leadership for those principals, and because behind the storefront finish that you see in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's a lot of poverty. And so we did our work over there for a year, and it was clear to me early on that that was not sustainable work and that the people really weren't interested in what we had to offer. And it wasn't easy being an American living in the Middle East at that time. That was 2007, 2008. Came back to the school district as a director of curriculum instruction, as the sole person responsible for K-12 educational delivery. And we really didn't have a department of instructional coaches. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But I want to talk about the superintendency and who I'm responsible to. I'm responsible to all of you who are here. There are board members here who are my bosses. I'm responsible to them. I'm responsible to students, parents, community, taxpayers. It's a heavy burden at times. When we make a decision that we think is not consequential, it can be consequential. I could share some emails with you, but I won't. But you can see in the yellow, those are all the people I think about when I make decisions. And so this thing, as I moved professionally in my leadership career, had to constantly think about, who am I affecting to apply for a job? Who am I affecting if we're going to move to another state or to another city? And so the key takeaway for anybody who's interested is don't let the sacrifices don't let your professional opportunities overcome the sacrifices of your family. That's one takeaway. Don't let sacrifices push down, but rather let those be the norm, and let the professional trajectory and the winding road that you're on be secondary to what family is all about. So timing is everything, fit is everything. I've looked at positions before, and I can share with you that I basically stopped an interview halfway through in a different community when they were asking questions that it was clear to me that I wasn't a good fit. And I just stood up and I said, I think I'll be wasting your time and you're going to be wasting my time. I think I said it a little bit nicer than that, but let's just conclude the interview right now because this is not a good fit. And if the fit between the individual and the organization is poor, one or both suffer. And that's so true, and I think I see some heads nodding up there. Maybe you've been in those situations or you've been leading people through those conversations as well. I'm looking for that little clock. Is there a clock? I've got 2 minutes left? All right, thank you. So what are the guiding audibles for me? My moral compass, ethics, and systems. Systems are really important to put in place. I'll give you one example. I was a principal of a small elementary school when I came to Grand Forks. Poverty levels at about 30%. Composite academic achievement was at about 38% on the North Dakota State Assessment. And in a short period of time, we put together a co-teaching model. They didn't trust me. I was new. It took us a year to have the conversation. But at the end of the day, we had 2 adults in every classroom. And we went, as our poverty level grew, our student achievement over the course of 3 years, 78% of our kids were proficient in literacy and math. That's the short story. That was quite a journey, but it was the ethics, the moral compass, and this thing called kids can't wait. And this slide about teaching, if a student enters kindergarten and has successful teaching for 3 consecutive years, their trajectory is completely different than a student entering kindergarten who has poor teaching for 3 years. Because if that happens, and that's a heavy burden on public education, that's a heavy burden on kindergarten teachers. But if that happens, if the latter happens, then the likelihood of dropping out increases, the likelihood of poverty increases, the likelihood of incarceration increases, and the likelihood of early mortality is part of their wheelhouse moving forward. So we take teaching and learning, I take teaching and learning very seriously, from my moral compass to my ethics. There are 4 frames of leadership that I think about all the time. Bowman and Dielman are 2 of my favorite authors, and it has to do with really working in leadership and leading through these 4 frames and not getting stuck in one. So the first one is, do you have the right humans in place? Do you have the right people on the bus, in the right seat on the bus? The second is, do you have your systems in place? Do you have the right structure in place to advance teaching and learning? Yeah, I have to always think about the dynamics of politics and the community norms and the culture. School board works with governance, I work with governance. Superintendents who are not successful are stuck in that frame all the time. And sometimes it's hard for me to get out of that, but I have to continually think about the 4 frames, and the final one is symbolic. So when somebody's in my office visiting with me, I'm constantly thinking about, what frame am I in? How many frames do I have to navigate to get through this conversation? And then these are the professional influencers, and I can't see my whole slide, but on the far left, there's a person by the name of Ron Boomersbach, retired superintendent, Devils Lake, North Dakota. He was a principal where I taught. This guy is the image of the 4 frames of leadership, even before the book was published. He did all those things seamlessly. Terrific mentor for me. He became the superintendent. He actually took a chance on me, hired me as a principal. And even in disagreement, he just had such wonderful soft skills to get through those difficult conversations. But he is a mentor. He's still my hero. I try to play golf with him once every summer just so we can reconnect. But he's been the most influential in my educational career. Certainly I've had wonderful professors along the way. John Backus was my advisor, got me through my program without bleeding too much. But he was a major influencer. And then you can see the books, and you can see some of the authors who have influenced my thinking as well. And that bottom one that has to do with stress, this is a real thing for our educators in today's environment. Everything is so politically charged. Everybody has an opinion about what teaching should be and what it should look like. And it's a really, really tough environment for our educators. There are frontline people who make it happen every day, and I'm just really proud to be a colleague of theirs and to lead 1,600 people, 7,400 students, 5,000 families, so that every audible that I make, whether it's macro or micro, I'm going to influence or I'm going to affect somebody in a positive or negative way. With that, I think I'm probably a minute over. Thank you very much. Love being here today. Love being in my alma mater, 4-time graduate. Go UND.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brenner, for being with us today. We're very grateful. Next week, we will be back here, the same time, the same place, with TEDx speaker and professor of geriatrics at UND, Dr. Jeremy Holloway. So we hope to see you there. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.